Land of the Lustrous by Haruko Ichikawa is a manga that feels visually structured. It's articulated in a manner of efficiency that expresses so much with so little. It's measured, planned, and precise in its execution, an unreserved need for symmetry, distinctively even distributed panels, and an enthralling behaviour in utilising both positive and negative space, something rarely used as a main stylistic feature in manga. Land of the Lustrous is a uniquely drawn manga, to put it simply. There aren't many that resemble its identity, nor many that follow in its footsteps. And it's through doing research on Ichikawa, reading interviews or snippets of commentary, that a reasoning clicked for me upon seeing her creative background. Made me understand why her work looks the way it does, why it's so notably unique in its presentation and exclusively attributable. Because Ichikawa's artistic skills were developed within the fields of graphic design before her ultimate path onto manga creation, and reading upon this fact made her unconventional style make sense. Having experience with industrial work and editorial design, not to mention attending Hokkaido University of Education where she enrolled within graphic design seminars, Ichikawa had practice with standardized commercial work, such as designing pamphlets, leaflets, or book covers. Now commonly, these are products that require clarity, understandable composition, and an ease of legibility. This elaborates the effective yet simple style of Land of the Lustrous, because she regarded graphic design rules and guidelines before illustrative ones, as graphic design and illustration are slightly different. In graphic design, communication is key. The job is to create a design that communicates a message clearly and quickly, only keeping what's necessary and strictly removing assets that aren't concise in delivering an idea or point. On the other hand, illustration can be more imaginative. It can be abstract, conceptual, caricature-esque, you name it. There may be a message in the meaning too, but illustration surrounds an importance on form, whilst graphic design sees products as a function. Ichikawa herself proclaimed her background in design formulated the strong influence in how she prioritises layout in her compositions, and balance over significance. Therefore, she leans towards function over style, ironically something I talked about in my Dungeon Meshi video regarding Yoko Kui's character design work, but that's why Ichikawa's work seems so neat and calculated, because it more than likely is. It's only because Ichikawa wanted to pursue the commitment of planning, editing and designing all of her own free will, or more than what was probably allowed in a corporate design agency, that she took a creative change into pursuing manga instead, which, given the end results, was probably more opportunistic and freeing. And looking into her main influences only explains the techniques and style she was inspired by, the first being Yokoyama Yuichi, whose style regards structure and form above all else, a lack of texturing and screen tones, but a strong usage of line work that carries a weight to his panels, not unlike Ichikawa's pages. The other mangaka she was influenced by was Takano Fumiko, whose work is also relatively simple in style, but less uniform and more free in her line work. Her Dormitory Tonkins manga appears reminiscent of safety instruction manuals, clean cuts of small actions one after another, something quite frequent in Land of the Lustrous too. When you regard both mangaka influences on top of her graphic design background, it's obvious Ichikawa has a preference towards styles that are bold, clean, and easily understood. Her story is observantly simplistic, and at times minimalistic. Even her storyboards and drafts are cleaner than most, as oftentimes, drafts are incohesive to all except for the artists themselves. She evidently has a set formation in mind when planning. There's no blocking nor shading in her storyboards, nor any indication of what is her most telling visual trait, being the achievement of utilising both negative and positive space. But what is negative and positive space? Both are principles commonly used within graphic design. Quite a few known logos utilise the techniques due to their proficiency in hiding a message, for subtle creativity, and again, to show less can be more, only pointedly reinforcing the habits of Haruko's design background. As negative space in particular is not often used in manga to the degree she takes advantage of. To quote the infamous Etherington brothers, Negative space is the space around and in between your subject. And so, on the other end of the spectrum, positive space is the subject, having more visual weight and significance than the adjoining space around it. This technique can also be synonymous with figure ground perception, wherein the figure is more demanding in attention than the ground, which should hold no interest nor distraction whilst highlighting the figure. It's not an easy technique to pull off. It can require a longer thought process towards composition adjustments and structural balance. For Ichikawa, it's not as simple as drawing a regular illustration that applies positive space, as we're so commonly used to seeing, and inverting it. She'd have to physically plan what elements in her layout are blocked out, and objectively measure its legibility and ease of viewing, especially when white on black is known to be visually stressing on the eyes when applied incorrectly. This craft requires more time and planning that undoubtedly turns artists away, especially in such a time-crunching industry, but instead, Ichikawa saw its potential, saw a unique style to exploit in the most expressive of ways, no matter the challenges. That being said, negative space has shown multiple purposes and subtle examples in manga, the most frequent uses being to convey time, mood, atmosphere, or the conception of memories or flashbacks. Oftentimes, mangaka will use the guttering on pages, the space behind and between panels, to convey these approaches. So it's not to suggest negative space hasn't been used elsewhere. It has. Mushishi by Yuki Urashibara is a great example, but it's mostly limited to functional means as opposed to aesthetical styling, which is where Lustrous differs. The only other manga I'd name as exceptions are Clover by Clamp and The Girl from the Other Side by Nagabe. For Clover, Clamp predominantly used negative space to create high contrast and would selectively use negative space as juxtaposed darker backgrounds, whilst mangaka Nagabe succinctly applies negative space as meticulously as Ichikawa does, but as evidenced through these pages, approaches it within a more illustrative behaviour. Looser line work, application of screen tones, and slight cross-hatching separates it from Ichikawa's style, but both show the advantages to utilising negative space as a feature and function simultaneously. Nagabe themselves stated, "I like to deliberately draw blank spaces, and I think adding meaning to the empty spaces and adding emotion to the positions of the characters is an expression that is possible only in the framed world of manga." Much like in Clover, Land of the Lustrous will have panels that are without any background. Some may consider this lazy or uncreative, but in circumstances like these, it's applying positive or negative space to highlight an emotive response. As Nagabe touched upon, blank space isn't always wasteful space. Sometimes you can let space do the talking. Both Hunter x Hunter and Bleach have moments of sparsely drawn backgrounds with characters as the highlight too. Although it is arguably fair to suggest the simplicity is a result of weekly deadlines, they still feel purposely executed and consistent throughout their visual journeys. To follow through with Land of the Lustrous, environmental designs and backgrounds are only drawn when deemed necessary. In a world of living gems and a desolate land, Earth is monotonous and untouched. The school in which the gems live is grand, vastly open, and symmetrical in a minimal architectural distortion. As of this, there's no legitimate reason to draw the repetitive setting in each panel. As with graphic design, if it's not adding anything significant, not relaying a message or interpretation, you don't need it except for additional aesthetic reasoning. Many manga follow this path of consideration. Often, romance manga will refrain from including background art during scenes of impactful character readings because the focus is towards the emotive visual language. It's, say, no different to K-dramas, wherein the all-too-familiar bokeh effect is continuously used to soften out backgrounds to reinforce the focus on the main character. The manga that do establish their environments more often are those where setting plays into the context of the narrative. A Bride's Story, Our Not So Lonely Planet Travel Guide, Blame, Keep Your Hands Off Ezoken, or Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, to name some examples. The deciding factor into drawing backgrounds is all about purpose, and in Land of the Lustrous, I can understand why Ichikawa refrained from drawing them. It didn't take anything away from the story, and kept the minimalistic style consistent throughout, and instead let positive space take up its own functional execution. So how does Ichikawa use positive and negative space, other than the minimal reasoning I've touched upon? Well, she mostly uses the simple combination to accentuate contrast of balance across her compositions. With a simpler style, the precision needed to execute said contrast is vital, as errors or disproportions would be easier to notice. As mentioned earlier, Ichikawa does repetitively draw blank backgrounds of solid black or white in the majority of panels, but many of which serve different purposes. The majority of the manga uses minimal detailing with the exception of the gems' hair, the main characteristic that helps identify each character due to their uniform designs. To paraphrase Ichikawa's own words, the cross-section, or more finer detailings, are some of the most difficult to illustrate. But through applying negative space, the shininess and glamour of the hair designs is a literal highlight in most scenes, and a reminder of their solidified state, unlike human forms. Oftentimes, positive space is also used to elevate a comedic gag, and negative space to show a passing of time. But Ichikawa's favourite seems to be its appliance in mediating a moment, applying a beat or dramatic pause for what will be a life-changing incident or exhaustive emotional impact. Scenes are often dramatised through these panels, from boisterously heavy revelations that sit with the reader, echoing umpteen amounts of suffering until the next chapter release, or for moments of melancholic emptiness. Negative and positive space working to present a deepened sense of trauma, shock, or even loneliness. With a quantifiable list of distressing consequences, loneliness is somewhat of an ever-lingering companion of Foss. The continuously empty void of darkness they're countered with seems a predestined notion that gradually becomes worse the further they physically strengthen but emotionally weaken. Moreover, Ichikawa will also use negative space as a visual literary device within a creatively offbeat process, applying negative space to force underlying structures of balance to equate safety and tranquility during pauses of Lunarian attacks, or to frame a page, directing viewers to the light as cynical irony given the immortal curse ridden upon the gems, and likewise, to structure a dramatic sense of flow or poignant notion of change. Foss's patterned agate legs being their first physical transformation increasing exaggerated speed, as showcased through negative and positive space combined. Shinsha is a character whose appearance is concealed within the dark of night, away from other gems. Their isolation is only further emphasised by coverings of black ink as they patrol the sombre twilight of inactivity, save for the oozing venom they excrete so tauntingly bright and obtruding. It becomes uncanny then, during the fleeting times of which they're featured within positive space, showing how positive and negative space in and of themselves can become a distinctive visual trait for characters. The last example of negative space is a scene that feels misplaced to call a favourite, and yet, it's a moment I'm always reminded of, and haunted by. Imprisoned by the new material of which Foss can't control, they watch the soul-destroying event of Antark's death. During the event, Foss is enshadowed in negative space, consumed by the gold and platinum alloy shielding their appearance from the Lunarians, and physically muting the ability to cry out to Antark. It's one of, if not the, most emotionally stirring scenes in the manga and for the future of Foss's lifespan. The imagery of Antark hushing in their last moments, the darkness of their broken gem body contrasting with the pure white background, is one that haunts Foss forever, and is the first event invoking the beginnings of PTSD. It's through the simple application of negative space that the feeling of helplessness is so deeply evocative and gut-wrenching. Despite not meeting Antark for long, their death scene is still one that depresses me to this day, and is executed in such a simple way with an effective technique. Haruko Ichikawa proves that sometimes less is more. More doesn't equate to quote-unquote better art, nor does it rid the story of visual flair or narrative progression. Much like a well-written essay, wherein the waffling is deleted and the most impactful words remain for concise reading, Art too can follow this rhetoric. Land of the Lustrous may not visually expand upon its character design, creative panels, environmental spreads, although it doesn't lack in architectural design from time to time, or other visual attributes. But it allows negative space to clearly warp readers' emotions to whatever Ichikawa wishes to invoke, by only including what's needed. Sometimes the space you leave is just as important as the space you fill. And for a story that follows a main character whose wish to grow stronger is their inevitable downfall, the use of negative space makes sure to heighten every change, every trauma, every confession, and the continuous progressional feeling of Foss's loneliness. Okay, that's a better angle. Hey guys, thanks for watching to the end of the video. I just want to give a massive shout out to you guys, the viewers, and also my patrons for continuing to support me and this channel. Any like, any comment, any share, all of it helps to push my videos out to the algorithm, and I'm pretty sure that's something everyone will want. My next video is actually going to be covering the series Gravity Falls. It's going to be kind of a sequel video to my Owl House one, discussing what it is I really love about the series. I'm a new watcher, I'm actually still watching it at this moment. I've got a few episodes left, but I've absolutely loved the show and loads of people on my Discord recommended I watch it. I did, or I'm doing, I am, and I'm loving it a lot. So I'm going to be doing a video on Gravity Falls, and for that video I'm actually going to be doing a giveaway over on my Patreon. I've got some stickers, pins, keychains, quite a few bits and bobs, all Gravity Falls related, and I'm going to be doing a giveaway. And to join the giveaway, all you've got to do is be a patron between this video and the release of the Gravity Falls video, which I think is going to be between 4 to 6 weeks. It doesn't take as long to do those kind of videos. But you can be any tier, you could be the £10, the £4 or the £1 tier. Doesn't matter, as long as you're a patron. Your name can then be dropped into a list, of which I'll get a randomizer to pick a name. So if that's something that you fancy joining, then I'll put my Patreon link down below in the description. Again, as usual, I just want to thank you guys, and I hope you're looking forward to the next video.